Welcome to the Minotaur's Maze. My guest today is Kedrik Winter Wolf, who is an esoteric guide and goldsmith, and he's also the owner of Ritualist Jewelry. Kedrik, welcome and thank you for being here.
Hey, welcome to be here. Glad to be here. Yeah.
No worries. So
lose my words there for a second.
No worries, but I think you want to be the host here, not the guest.
Yeah, no, sure. Okay, let me get back in the other chair.
So cool. Just to start, then, can you just give a quick, brief overview of who you are, what you do, and what you did before this, and how you got started?
That's a big question.
Yeah, I mean, just run through it quickly because we'll go more over it into the as we go into the podcast, but. What I try to do, what the aim of this question for me really is, because my audience is generally non-esoteric and non-spiritual. Right. But what I want to get across is, when you speak to guys like yourself, you're not crazy psychos in another world. That you are normal people that lived a normal life, but you've just got this interest and then you can talk about how obviously you got into this.
Right. Yeah. So I guess in chronological order, I was raised Catholic and went to church twice a week, every week for 10 years. And something clicked in that process. At the time, I wasn't aware that Catholicism has so much esoteric in it. It was just go to church, sit in the pews. Something clicked when I was about 12 or 13, and I kind of got the bravery up to negotiate with my parents. And I said, look, I will trade you. On Sunday, when you go to church, I don't want to go, but I promise I will stay here and meditate. This is a 14-year-old speaking. Yeah. And they're like, yeah, whatever. And I was like, no, seriously, I will sit in the treehouse and I will meditate for an hour while you're gone. And they said yes. And so I started, I didn't really know what I was doing, to be honest. I started meditating when I was 14 and just kind of kept that up. That led into studying kind of energetic, esoteric phenomenon. I started with Wicca, I started with Druidism, just to try and figure out what I was experiencing. Kind of ended up in Zen meditation, got into a bit of like the Eastern meditation philosophies, and that revealed phenomena that I couldn't explain with science. Very intellectual family, and so I said, okay, how do I explain this? Kept digging, and 20 years later, I've been studying esoteric mysticism, mythography, object and shape power, metallurgy, all of that. And what I am now, I suppose, metaphist, which is kind of the title that I use on Twitter, is the most accurate. It's an old word that basically describes somebody who is, to the best of their ability, using empirical process to explore non-empirical phenomena. So like science is never going to be able to explain magic, but we're going to do our best to try and understand what's happening and look at every piece of the puzzle, like every layer of the stack, and look at how those interact and how to optimize that. So a lot of history in a short description.
Yeah. So like, obviously you've just mentioned it a little bit there, but in terms of like how you help your clients or the work you do, what exactly is it you do in layman, as much as layman's terms as you can describe it?
Yeah, of course. That's what actually one of the interesting things about my work with clients is that I, while in my personal life, have a very dense esoteric practice that to many people might seem very strange. I got there through self-mastery. I got there through meditation. I got there through fitness, morning routine, nutrition, right? Like at the end of the day, you are your primary tool as a mystic, as a practitioner. And so my thinking was, again, as a 16-year-old, how do I make sure this tool works the best it possibly can? And what I find with clients is they're in the same boat to some degree, farther or less along. And so most of my work with clients is self-mastery. It is mindset, it's paradigm awareness, objectivity versus subjectivity, framing, I have spiritual kind of like esoteric clients where they are working with higher level mysticism, and I'm guiding them through that. But honestly, a lot of my clients, it is the fundamentals of how to master yourself, do better, build a better business, be functional.
Mm-hmm. Brilliant. Now, the reason why I asked that question is obviously I've had a few esoteric occult people on the podcast before. But what you've described to me there, that just sounds like any self-improvement coach kind of thing. Whereas the previous ones I've spoken to, they speak about dealing with spirits or something like that. So where does the mystical I suppose, probably better off starting with defining what you mean by mysticism, but where does the mysticism element come in what you do, which would be different from what a standard self-improvement, self-mastery type of coach would do?
Right. So, it's a bit of a pile, but I guess we can kind of like frame mysticism and magic, and then that'll maybe fit it together better. First off, there are a lot of definitions for magic. The definition for magic is dependent on the context, right? And everybody sets their context. If you're a good magician, you can move between context, one of my mentors, as he would say, is you're looking to master all of the domains that you have access to, whether that's metaphysics or magic or self-mastery, nutrition, science, history, art. You're looking at a domain and you're trying to find out all of the layers. And so kind of we'll call it a foreshadowing, everything has magic in it. How I would define magic to try and catch as many of the definitions that I use as possible would be that magic is the active interaction with non-ordinary phenomena. Okay. And maybe another way to say that is magic is active interaction with the energetic universe outside of an empirical bias. It's a willingness to look at everything, even if you can't explain it with science. Mm-hmm. And this is what I mean when I say context really matters. So maybe for your listeners, a good reference is like a good analogy is if you imagine like a picture frame with a canvas, and there's a lot of things happening on the canvas, but for simple version, we'll say there's dots and lines that connect to each other. Science views the canvas frame as the ultimate edge. And a lot of people, and this will probably push some buttons, a lot of people feel that science and magic are the same or connected or whatever. They're very close cousins. Science came from magic. Some of the original scientists were also magicians. Mm-hmm. However, science is a reaction to magic. It is looking at an interaction with non-ordinary phenomena and saying, I'd like to observe it, measure it, explain it, repeat it. Non-ordinary phenomena don't fall into that. So science says, if you left the picture frame, you don't count. It's invalid. Something's happening, but we'll prove and explain it later. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so the dots and the lines are all on the canvas. Magic, being an interaction with non-ordinary phenomena, is also an interaction with ordinary phenomena. It's the whole picture. And so with magic, some of your dots are in the canvas and some of them are outside of the frame. For magic, the frame is more of a circle drawn in the sand, and dogs and cats and people and whatever are running in and out of the circle, and it's arbitrary. It's a good reference point. It's not a rule. So we take that and we go back and we go, okay, what is it that you do that is esoteric? It sounds like life coaching. I am willing to and highly skilled at accessing anything on the board, which is everything on the board, everything in the universe, to help my clients. So if they need magic, if they need a spell, if they need a ritual, if they need nutrition and meditation, if they need focus, if they need to get past depression, we'll do that. And I've used magic, I've used esoteric practices that traditional therapy would consider are not real to cure depression many times. It's not that hard.
Can you give an example of that? Sorry to cut in there. Just give a quick example about that.
Yeah. So let's see. A good example is that I had a client. She was, I believe she had actually gone to a therapist and was diagnosed as depressed. They tried to give her medication. She said no. She had known about me prior, so we started our work together, and I basically kind of worked with her to discover, like, what are the outlines of your depression? What's the seed? What's the origin? How'd you get there? Why are you stuck there? And I go, okay, now that we've defined what it is that you're dealing with, how do we solve it? And fairly long story short, it kind of ended up being a case where I taught her field awareness, energetic field awareness. I taught her state control. I taught her a couple kind of morning ritual spells that she did every day. And then I taught her how to mentally identify where she was getting stuck, and then gave her a tool set of energetic skills, of magic skills to apply to that to get out of it. And so much of what I did, a traditional therapist would say, that's not going to do it. You need to take drugs. It's not sustainable. But as far as I know, it's been 6 years, and I think she's still good. I'll actually check in with her after the call because now I'm curious. But it's hard to get specific, because with magic, if you're doing it well, you are tailoring every activity to the circumstance. And so the particular spells and processes that worked for her may not work for somebody else. Maybe something that's different than some of the other folks you've had on here is that I do not I don't hold myself stuck to interaction with spirits as the only modality of interaction. You can think of magic, in my case, more as playing with the fundamentals, interacting directly with the elements, directly with the elementals, directly with as I said, the energetic fields that are present. It probably looks a lot more like alchemy and that sort of thing to most people than spirits and demons and that sort of whatnot.
Okay, interesting. So I mean, I relate to, obviously everyone's got a different definition of magic. Like, even the guest I've had on prior, every single one of them has given me a definition which is different. And I suppose, my own definition, it's, I'm not a practitioner or anything like this. Like, this is just something I've got an interest in. But from all the texts that I've studied and all of the other stuff that I've, looked at, my definition, although it's very oversimplified, magic is the manipulation of energy. And then, well, how do you manipulate that energy? Well, I mean, you can do, as to use the words that you've used, ordinary stuff like, going to the gym. That's changing your state, it's changing your energy. So that is a form of magic, which is a more acceptable level. But then, this is going to be my next question to you, is obviously then there's ways that you use the word non-ordinary stuff, and this is where you get into the levels of curses and spells and I suppose talismans and whatnot. So what examples do you have of non-ordinary stuff, and how would it work for somebody who's never, either doesn't believe in this stuff or never come across it?
Right. Well, maybe to start, to use your example, going to the gym, going to the gym is an ordinary phenomenon. You're in a physical place working physical muscles. The non-ordinary phenomena you could add to that is, what is the mental frame that you're holding while you're there? What is the energetic awareness that you're holding? Did you go on a particular day at a particular time? Have you concentrated your will, your focus, your intention? There are non-ordinary layers you can add to that, and you'll notice physical trainers are starting to touch on that. They're starting to get particular about mood and emotion and state. To my mind, and you might notice that I like your definition, actually. I might change manipulation to interaction to include things that are non-activated or not actualized. What's the word for that? Where you're not actually manipulating or changing anything, you might just be observing or experiencing.
Yeah, okay.
So I think that catches most definitions, right? Somebody who interacts with spirits and they call on a spirit to go to the gym, okay, sure, that's fine. Maybe somebody calls on the element of fire before they go to the gym. Maybe somebody does a ritual on their way into the gym. There's a lot of ways to do it. So I like definitions that can encompass all valid forms of it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So the gym's a great example. You can stack magic onto that, or you can leave it ordinary. I think your question was particularly related to like what I'm doing with magic and what non-ordinary is. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's take ritualists, for example. So ritualist jewelry, I've been a goldsmith professional for 12 years. Obviously been an esoteric practitioner a lot longer. And so at some point I thought, okay, been studying the power of object and shape for a long time. What can I do with this? And nowadays, a lot of the talismans that I make, the totems and the relics, and some of it's custom, some of it's pre-made. I am designing the jewelry from the very conception of the visual on the paper, all the way to the physical object, with an attention to ratios, proportions, numerologies, the numerological implications of the dimensions. I custom make all of my alloys, and I don't make them based on traditional standards of goldsmithing. I make them based on esoteric standards of occult. I choose gems for a particular reason. I choose where I get the gems for a particular reason. And so I'm constructing an object that, in terms of like material and shape and dimension, expresses a particular concept into reality. Just its existence alone kind of defines a vector. And then once that's done, I'll do kind of a clearing ritual or a clearing process. And then I will charge, or in kind of a more Christian word, consecrate the object with a particular energy. So for example, I might make a totem or a talisman for awareness, right? The shape, the dimensions, the ratios, the numerology, the symbolism, everything is pointed towards awareness. Then I cleanse it, and then I will actually bring the experience and sensation of awareness into my system, and then through a ritualistic process, push that into the object and then encapsulate it. And so now this object is energetically holding that thing, as well as physically representing in the world. The reason I do both is because you could pump awareness into a glass, and now that glass is a totem for awareness. When the object itself also contains that symbology and that shape and that form, now you have brought the person's subconscious, superconscious, their neuroplasticity, their expectation, their cultural awareness into the frame. You're accessing more of those stacks. And so, like I said, as a metaphysicist, my goal is to get as many of the layers working together as possible. And if you read through the testimonials for Ritualis, it's wildly effective. And you could say it's the placebo from the shape. Maybe it is. You could say it's the field that I put into the piece. Seems more accurate to me. Again, if magic is the interaction with the non-ordinary outside of an empirical bias, I am going to use empirical science to try and understand it better, but I'm not attached to that answer. And so if the observer wants to treat the piece as itself being powerful, or if the observer wants to treat it as a subconscious trigger for power, I'm not really attached to either one.
Brilliant. Okay, there's a few things off of that, but before I get into some of those, like we've already kind of touched upon it, but it's something you mentioned on Twitter, where you want to discuss this thing about the relationship between esoteric and ordinary phenomenon, as well as context and content, which again we've touched upon, as well as the mindset required to do mysticism effectively. So what do you mean by all of that?
Yeah, I mean, again, we've poked at some of it, but context is really important. Context is the frame. Content is the stuff inside of the frame. Your definition of magic will change based on your frame, and what you have access to will change based on your frame. In the terms of mysticism, the context frame is how you're thinking about it. It is the domain that you're interacting with. If I'm doing a love spell, the interaction is in human relationships, emotion, empathy, connection, infatuation, whatever. Versus if I'm doing some sort of like internal foundation work with awareness, it's a completely different context.
Yeah.
So that really defines it first. And then when you're inside of those context frames, like to the second part of your question, like the mental state required. What's a good example? So let's say, simple example, you're doing a spell to light a candle from across the room. You've got to do the ritual to get yourself focused and concentrated, set up the space. The ritual generates energy. The energy builds in the space. Then the energy concentrates on the candle's wick. And then through concentration of energy and your expectation and visualization of heat and fire, it bursts into flame, right? the first step, the ritual, is it's in ordinary reality. It's just it's a process that you do in the physical space. Energy concentrating and building and then localizing on a wick, that's all non-ordinary, right? We can't really explain that in ordinary terms. But then the wick bursts into flames, well, we're back into ordinary again. So this process is a dance across that frame. Ordinary, non-ordinary, non, and then back into ordinary. As a practitioner, I can do this because I have the focus of intention, of will, of presence. I know what I'm looking for. I've built a ritual that contains the processes that get all of that into place. It generates a spell that moves the energy where I want it, right? And so I tell this to a scientist and I say, hey, I can do this thing. And he says, okay, prove it. Because in the frame of science, it's empirical. It must be empirical. Now you're in the room again and you've got another person with you, but that person is a skeptic. They don't expect any of this to work. They actually expect it not to work, right? And potentially, depending on how strong the practitioner is, they might have some doubts now that somebody's watching who doesn't think it's real. Whereas before, the entire room was 100% convinced and convicted in this process, you now are splitting it at best 50-50. Because if any doubt is generated in the practitioner, now you're at 45%. Magic is using the tools of the practitioner, right? The internal clarity and expectation and concentration of will. If the other half of the, you've invited this guy into the space, if the other half of the practitioners are expecting the opposite, you're now at odds, right? And so this is why a lot of times you'll see a mystic, a practitioner says they can do a thing. When they're brought on camera, they can't pull it off. Granted, there are a ton of fakes, right? There are a ton of fakes. It's a very easy thing to fake when you don't have to prove it. But a lot of the real ones get screwed because, and then you'll notice, like, if you watch any of these videos, they're like, oh, well, maybe the lighting's off, or it's the wrong time of day, or I'm just nervous, whatever. They're looking at ordinary phenomena in the process to try and fix it. Oh, the room's too cold. It's not my fault. It's exactly 100% your fault, because your job as the practitioner is to hold the energetic gravity to make that thing happen. And if you invite somebody into the space who is pulling in the opposite direction, you've got to pull twice as hard. And there's a video of a guy, I forgot his name, but he lights a crumpled ball of paper on fire with just his chi. And as far as I know, it hasn't been debunked. The amount of esoteric gravity that this guy can generate while being observed by people that aren't quite convinced it's real, that's huge. And so that's why I say, like, the mindset is so important, because you are the tool. There's no physical mechanism outside of you that's going to do it for you until you get into, like, again, totems, scalar wave technology, that sort of stuff. And maybe to tie that back in, the whole point of Ritualis, the reason that I love totems is that it gives access to non-ordinary mysticism to people who aren't quite there yet, right? Practitioner might not be able to hold the potency of true awareness. Well, I can put that in an object and hand it to you and give you a head start. My hope is actually that the person will transcend that and no longer need it, and they can pass it on to a friend or their kids or whatever.
So based on that, then obviously if you do have a client and you do that totem thing and you put all the energy in there, will that still work if they don't believe? Or do they need to have some kind of belief in it, and do they need to, basically get rid of doubt or whatnot?
Right. That's a great question. I don't have a lot of clients who don't trust the process. So it's a hard thing to test. I have kind of a strong position of not performing magic on people without their consent as much as possible. However, I have kind of like these catch-all permissions from certain friends and family. And so I've done tests with totems. Unless they have significant skepticism, like they're pulling really hard in the opposite direction, to some degree, they do still work. I've also had clients that did not expect them to work as well as they did, right? So they were hoping for something, but they were in doubt, and they just, blows them away. Because I'm, well, maybe that's not necessarily true, but with totems, I am connecting that totem to something else in the universe, some other anchor or battery source. However, I'm still the one doing it, and so there is a limitation on how much I can concentrate myself. And again, I've had really good results. However, um, you're at odds, right? There's a Austin Spare kind of talks about. Well, Austin Spare and Peter Carroll both kind of have a way of looking at it as almost like a math equation, like how much focus you can put into the space is at odds with the general probability that it does or doesn't happen, and it's at odds with the likelihood of that even being possible. So lighting a candle with your mind, not so big. Lifting a truck with your mind, it's a bigger thing. I noticed that the totems that work on fundamental aspects of existence, awareness, perception, instinct, intuition, comfort, confidence, work a lot better than something with a very particular intention, like this totem is going to bring you $1 million or even $100.
Okay, brilliant. So based on that then, which is the follow-up question, which is coming back to what you were saying earlier. So if you are, not you personally, but if you are a practitioner whose mindset isn't at the required level, or you've got ill intent, can you create these totems and give them to people without them realizing and cause them bad luck and harm? In other words, how, what is the danger here? And are people susceptible to this, even if they don't believe in it or not aware of it, if somebody does have ill intent?
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's a reason why I have yet to actually take on any apprentices or teach what I do, because I'm still trying to suss out the proper way to assess somebody for kind of ethical standards. You can think of it like a heater in a room, or a device that mists moisture into the air. Like the effect is happening. It's happening on a non-ordinary energetic level, but the effect is happening. If it's a strong enough totem, it doesn't matter if you believe or not, because the phenomena is still occurring. However, disbelief is itself a belief, right? There's really no such thing as disbelief. There's just a counter opinion, so to speak. And that is going to create an effect in your field. It's going to kind of modify how your aura interacts with the energetic spaces around you. And so strong enough disbelief, and you do end up with an interesting situation where one person who believes could be holding an object and saying, this thing is bringing me luck. People keep giving me free stuff. Holy cow. And the other person could say, I've been holding it for a week and nothing's happened because it's not real. That's enough. It's enough to change the field. Stronger object can overcome more skepticism, right? Again, it's all kind of an equation of balance.
And obviously this works on an individual level, but could something like this be happening on the global scale? I mean, I don't want to get into the conspiracy side of things, but there's obviously lots of theories out there and what's happening in certain groups and behind the scenes and whatnot. But are you aware of anything on a global scale, or is it just stories, or is it possible?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the conspiracy theorists love to talk about, and I should distinguish, conspiracy theory is a conspiracy that hasn't been proven. Conspiracy fact has got some weight to it. So conspiracists in general love the concept of predictive programming, right? They're putting it out there into pop culture to make you think a certain thing and expect it, and that makes it come true. That is 100% an esoteric phenomena in occult science, which is kind of like early 1900s, late 1800s. A bunch of scientists decided this stuff seems to be real. We're going to do our best to study it, right? And so they kind of birthed this subsect of science, like empirically minded wizards, essentially. And so they kind of coined, I believe the term is older than this, but they coined a phrase called thought forms. Because we're energetic beings, because magic is activated by the internal space, if you concentrate your emotion, your energy, and your thought strong enough, you will create an energetic form, an energetic object, in some opinions, an entity that will pursue the purpose or the mission or the intention that you put into it. Now, the flip side to this is thought forms occur even when you don't intend. So if somebody gets extremely angry, and they're extremely emotionally invested and they really believe in the thing that pissed them off, they're going to create a negative thought form. And say, for example, that thought form is about a specific person. Well, it's going to fly through the astral layer to that person and it's going to buzz around. And this is where you get stories about, well, poltergeists. There are also poltergeists, but a lot of kind of ghost phenomenon are actually thought forms. It's humans generating concentrated energy with a mission statement, and it goes off to pursue that mission until its completion or its end, or it runs out of juice or whatever. So to answer your question, if millions of people start to believe a particular thing, even if it's kind of half-hearted, well, that's a million half-hearted beliefs. And that's a lot of energy focused on a particular thing. And so is it predictive programming, or is it kind of like cause and effect of fear? Are these thought forms binding together to create larger phenomenons? You hear people talk about the egregore and whatnot. Maybe. Like, I don't know if anybody has the actual answer, but I can tell you beyond a shadow of a doubt that thought form phenomena is real. And based on that, I would be zero surprised if the expectation of millions of people created pretty big effects, possibly negative effects.
And before I carry on with that conversation, obviously, you've just made a statement saying that thought form is 100% real. Do you have an example or a story to confirm why, what proof you've had to make you believe it's real?
Right. Yeah, I mean, again, non-ordinary phenomenon. So proof in mysticism is almost entirely anecdotal, right? It is cause and effect in, I did the thing with this intention and that happened, and I can't seem to find proof elsewhere. That's the part a lot of people drop out. They're like, oh, well, I expected it to, unexplained gifts to come in and I got a free coffee today. That means it's real. Okay, well, keep testing, keep checking. Did you have a punch card? Like, how did this happen? And so a good mystic is going to check all of those pieces. Endless stories. On a number of occasions, I have had kind of thought form intention, or sat down, did my meditation, got into a state, did my kind of like focus process, and then said, this is the thing that I want to create. This is the time frame that I want it to happen in. Make it so, let it be. So mote it be, so mote it be. Send that thought form out and gotten the result. And it's anything from a particular type of client, particular type of relationship. Basically every single romantic relationship I've been in, I've seen the person ahead of time, down to very particular characteristics. Red hair, rides horses, likes going camping, like very particular things. Out to really general stuff, like I need a helping hand right now, like any and all supportive gifts, any and all like unexpected rewards would be great. And I keep concentrating on that. I give it a daily ritual of building that thought form, and then stuff just starts pouring in. Even 2 weeks ago, I started working with another mystic with some of he uses scalar tech and morphic fields, and started adding that to my ritual. And all of a sudden I was getting free meals, free coffee. I got a pair of free shoes. I got a reduction in my rent. I got my whole deposit back. It's endless. It just keeps pouring in. And you could say, oh, well, you're just having a lucky streak. Well, maybe, but I can't really point out to where that lucky streak came from. I know that's not a very concrete answer. And you can tell as a scientist, I love giving concrete answers, but in mysticism, it's very hard to do.
Yeah, so a lot of what you're describing there, like, a lot of people would say, you're just describing the law of attraction there.
Sure.
And obviously, we've had the books like The Secret, which, were popular, and all of that. So what you're essentially saying is all of that stuff is true. But then is there not, an added element where you have to still take action, just putting out the thought forms and thinking it and believing it? Is that enough, or do you need to take certain actions as well?
Absolutely. You have to participate. The thing about law of attraction and similar books is it's an oversimplified marketable concept, whereas like Abraham Hicks, if you really dig into it, it's pretty complicated. She doesn't make it easy. I think Abraham Hicks is a lot closer to how manifestation actually works in the universe. I have a pretty dense non-dual Zen background. I've had some experiences with non-dual meditation that have defined how I understand the world. And to that effect, like we are in a dual universe. We are expressions of some sort of abstract nothingness, everythingness into reality. You can say, I want the world to give me A, B, C, but you are part of the world. And so your participation is essential. You, in kind of a quantum entanglement sort of way, are really visualizing something that is inevitable anyways, right? If we kind of jump out of the timeline, jump out of the framework of time, you're just seeing what's coming. And so you say, oh, I really wish I could get a free pair of shoes. Well, that was already going to happen. You're just tuning into what's coming. However, if, for example, you say, man, I really would love to just like, I'd love to get a free coffee this morning, but you don't go to the coffee shop, how is that going to happen, right? Maybe somebody will come to you. If you do it hard enough, if your manifestation is strong enough, maybe somebody will deliver a coffee to your front door randomly. That'd be great. It'd be excellent evidence. But realistically speaking, you need to be in a position for the universe to hand you what it is that you are looking for. And so mysticism is the process of interacting with the non-ordinary. It is also generating the kind of energetic gravity and concentration in yourself to actually make those requests, what, like Solomonic might call petitions. And then it's you being available, which means eyes open, paying attention out in the world to receive them. The more often that people can generate the results they want without, like basically kind of trying to make themselves unavailable, the better, because that's great evidence. But realistically speaking, we've got to participate. Full stack, start to finish.
Brilliant. Now that makes perfect sense when you're looking to do something and you take action. But going back to what we talked about earlier, especially on the global scale, if somebody's doing something to you with ill intent,
right,
and you don't participate, can it still impact you? And do you need to protect yourself, or how would that work then?
Right, of course. I mean, again, not participating is participating in a certain direction. Yeah. So I at no point do I give somebody the pass of saying, oh, well, you're just not in it, right? Because if you're in dual reality, you're in it. If you're listening to this podcast, you're in it. So disbelief in the thing is an active force against the thing. If your disbelief is strong enough, that's essentially a shield. But humans have an extensive history of interaction with the non-ordinary. We have an extensive magic and mystic culture in almost every corner of the world. Yep. Most religions, if you really look at their history, were once mystic cults that have kind of been standardized into an approachable format. And so in the genetics of every person is the expectation that it's possible, right? Which means some part of you probably thinks that no matter how much you disbelieve, it might still happen. There's a reason why, like, Catholics are a good example, or Mormonism, for example, really opposed to magic. It's not because they genuinely think it's not real. If they 100% thought it wasn't real, they wouldn't care. They wouldn't pay attention. They're opposed to it. They're afraid of it. They are against it because there's some concern there. And so for most people, I guess I'll use that caveat. For most people, some form of protection is important. It's necessary. It's essential. Now, is this in the form of the states that you maintain and bring back into your awareness every morning during your meditation? Is it some sort of body posture or mudra that you practice throughout the day to shift the framework of your auric field? I work a lot with a really good friend of mine, Laura Styler, astronomically good energetic healer. It's one of the most profound experiences I've ever had. I can actually feel her touching parts of my auric field, different organs, from 1,000 miles away over the phone. She has an entire process of teaching people to kind of like fortify their auric field against intrusion. And part of it's energetic and part of it's kind of intention and availability. And then you can zoom all the way out to like, okay, I don't know if I can hold that. I don't know if I have the morning routine availability for that. I've got kids, I've got a job, like help. And that's where you get into places with like what, Occult Hours does with candle work. What I do with totems is like, okay, if you trust it and you want protection, I can provide an object that will hold that field for you. Wear the object and you're good to go. you might need to recharge it or cleanse it every now and then. You might have to upgrade it if you have any like particularly violent attackers. Preferably you would get away from those attackers. But yes, some sort of defense, whether it be the most basic belief all the way up to a very strong object, is, I think, essential for everybody, especially as the world gets crazier by the day.
Yeah. I mean, I was coming on to that point anyway. So obviously the last 2 to 3 years, the world's been crazy. Obviously, there's been a lot of things happening, a lot of fear. And again, I don't really want to get into the conspiracy side of things, but when you've got such an onslaught of fear and negativity, and you've got this virus that's going around, and nobody knows anything about it, but everyone's having this fear,
Right.
like how much of that, without angering anyone, but how much of that is real and how much is because of the negative programming and the fear, and obviously,
Right.
if on a global scale this we're being subjected to this onslaught, how do we then respond to it again on a global scale? Obviously on an individual level it's a lot easier,
Yeah.
but on a global scale, like how would you respond to that?
Yeah. I mean, I think the thing that I could say that'll maybe irritate the most people is that all of it is real. Whether it is an actual virus or you think it's an actual virus, the effects on your energetic field, your perception, your experience, what you do with your day, that's real. And again, with the thought form concept, manifestation theory, if enough people think it's real, it starts to become real. So real or not, it's all real, unfortunately. I think of response to that in terms of, again, layers. And also I start with fundamental layers and build up. So again, like if I give you a totem of protection, but your entire perception of reality is that everything is going to get you, you just have open doors in every direction. My work can only do so much. So you got to go down the stack to the bottom. The fundamental layers are belief, expectation, principles, paradigms. Above that, you get into culture, you get into kind of internal personal culture, family culture, then you get into local culture, right? You go above that and you get into kind of like structures of culture, law, habits, what we eat, how we eat it, how we produce it, right? You work your way up into, practices and spiritual beliefs, into mystical practices, into mystical objects, right? There's just this whole stack of ways that we can use magic to interact with this thing, and a lot of it looks fairly ordinary. That's kind of the buzzkill that a lot of people bump into, is I'm not going to tell you that this entire thing is this wild, fantastical world. Most of magic is right in front of your face all the time. It's being able to transcend the ordinary and see the non-ordinary layers of the everyday phenomenon. And so how do we deal with it on a global scale? It's got to start at the bottom. We need people to feel more comfortable, feel more confident, doubt less, fear less, believe the hype less, question negativity more. If there's a huge story going around of the 17th iteration of some killer virus, like do actual research, do a little bit more poking around. Easier said than done, of course, especially with the info wars and the hypernormal stimuli that's happening. I'm trained, I'm literally professionally trained in info sorting and data aggregation, and it's hard. But how do we fix it on a global scale? We have to subvert some of these negative trends that are happening in the thought form layer and the esoteric and the belief and in the mental, and counterbalance the scale, and until we do, the trend will continue heading towards down.
Brilliant. And so based on all of that, like what is your view then, given your experience and even in your circles, of what's happening in the world? Is there an evil group, or whatever you want to call it, that are trying to do bad things, and what is your, I suppose, if you do believe that, and in your circles they do believe that, like what is the response to that? And I suppose why I'm asking that question is because some people use some of the words that are being used, the great reset is in fact the Great Awakening. So some people believe there's a spiritual war going on right now. And the physical manifestations of what we're seeing, the bad things happening in the world, but behind it all, there's actually a spiritual war going on. Do you believe that? And are you involved in it?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question, because I am in a lot of groups that are definitely kind of on the weird edge of things, but I tend to hold the pole of the irritatingly middle ground guy, because I'm trained in and have a knack for meta maps. I want to see all of the layers and how they interact. I want to understand both sides. And so simultaneously, is it possible that there are lizard people egregores controlling civilization through the Illuminati to create, predictive programming to destroy the world? Totally, 100%. I don't see a lot of strong evidence for it, so I leave it in the conspiracy theory box. Is it more likely that the natural complexity and complication of society has created a door for governing bodies, government, state actors, billionaires, to take advantage of weak spots and push them to their benefit? Way more likely, way more evidence. I'm not attached, and this is kind of the thing that confuses people, is I don't know, maybe I've just been blasted out into non-dual reality too many times, but I'm not attached to any one of the stories. In my mind, I kind of map them together in a single pile of probability and possibility. And so I'm just looking at it like, less likely that there is a multidimensional bug telling us what to do through our bad dreams, more likely that a bunch of bad actors are battling each other for control. If it turns out that the lizard people are real, well, that sucks, and I wouldn't be surprised. I don't know if that quite answers your question.
It's interesting, but you could obviously talk about this all day and go into so many different directions. But speaking of lizard people, I won't get into the lizard people. Like, obviously, I've been aware of those theories. I don't know if I'm willing to extend my belief to that extent. However, I do believe in spirits and demons and that kind of thing. Now, you mentioned it earlier that even in some of the religions that they obviously believe in it. That's why they're against it. My personal faith is Islam, and I don't know how much you know about the Muslim religion and what their beliefs are, but magic is real, spirits are real, they're called jinns. The only thing is we're not permitted to basically delve in that kind of thing. So it's against Islamic law to contact spirits and to do magic that way. And again, obviously with the definition that I had earlier, if magic is a manipulation of energy, then prayer falls under that, because if you pray, you're changing your energy. So I wouldn't say it's against magic per se, but it's more that type of magic where you're using spirits or demons or that kind of thing. And basically what I'm trying to get out there, so yes, we believe in it, but we don't practice it because of all the dangers. And that's the thing, so it's not just the rules of do's and don'ts. There's a reason why you're allowed to do some things and you're not allowed to do other things. And the biggest probably reason here is because of the dangers. And what is your experience with spirits and other dimensional beings? And can you talk a little bit about what those dangers are, if you do believe there are dangers?
Right. Yeah, I mean, maybe to frame it a little, part of the reason why many religions have rules like that is because at some point in the lineage of that religion, significant number of negative experiences happen. And so, most religions have an origin in spirituality. Small group of people going with the flow. They're like, okay, we bumped into demons a couple of times now and it's not working, so let's just not do that. And then their kids are like, Dad says no demons. And then their kids are like, no demons, right? A lot of religions have this history of developing their laws and rules, and I can understand that. I guess another context frame I would say is that I don't feel like some practitioners that spirits and demons are the only way to interact with energy. Occult science has a really beautiful way of describing it. there are 7 planes of existence. Within each plane, there are 7 subplanes. We're on the 2nd plane, technically. In the 3rd plane, the astral plane, there are all manner of creatures and energies at play, including our own thoughts and emotional space, right? And so it's not just demons up there in an empty void. There are environmental phenomena, there's weather, there's terrain, there's flora and fauna, right? It's an entire 2nd layer of existence.
Mhm.
I don't personally choose to work with the kind of like sentient demons and angels and spirits layer of that, because for my part, I'm much more interested in fundamentals. I'm much more interested in, can I interact directly with the field itself? Like, do I need an intermediary? I might need a particular stone, I might need a particular plant or a particular ritual. But if I can get straight to the source, that's my preference. I have worked a little bit with entities, and I kind of use that word to catch all of the sentient creatures of the astral mystical world.
Mhm.
And in my experience, it's the predictability is not high enough for me. I want to have a little more reliability in my interaction with the energetics, because I know that if it goes wrong, again, back to the picture frame analogy, if you screw up one of your lines, well, it's still on the canvas, so you know what's happening. If you screw up a spell, you're out in non-ordinary space, and we don't fully, as physical beings, like in this particular container that we're existing in, we don't grok that 100%. And so you screw up in the non-ordinary, and you have no idea where that's going to pop out. The cause and effect out there is twisted beyond belief. And so my preference is to just stick with things that have a little bit more of a reliable result, a little more expected result, which is almost not existent in magic, but you kind of get what I'm saying.
Yeah. I mean, again, there's so many interesting things in there, and my mind's spinning with questions and whatnot. But sticking with that theme, then obviously with religion, like for me, like religion isn't just a set of do's and don'ts, especially the Islamic religion. Obviously there's rules there, but the ultimate purpose really is the purification of the soul, and the whole point of the practices is to elevate the soul into the higher realms and then return back to the source of all things, which in my case is God. So obviously you had a Catholic background, but what is your worldview now? That do you believe in a God, and what is the purpose of, I suppose, the grand purpose of magic? Is it the elevation of the soul? Is it something else? Because I've mentioned in these podcasts before, where some of the books that I've read on magic, the whole point of the hardcore discipline and the mistakes and all that, the whole point of it all is so that you use magic to elevate yourself and elevate the soul, and then help other people to kind of do the same thing. But if you're not disciplined, and if you make a mistake, then you're opening up yourself to so many dangers that you just might not be able to handle. But what is your grand view of it all?
Yeah. I mean, I absolutely believe in religion. I think it's a very real thing that happens. I also believe that in an ideal world and an ideal kind of expression of religion, each of us would have our own religion, right? Like that's the discipline, is that you build a religion based on your own framework of expectations, of rules, of what you've learned works, doesn't work. And realistically speaking, I would be curious your thoughts on this, but in something like Islam, for example, even though technically there is a core religion that everybody is following, everybody's relationship within that to that religion is unique to them. And so in a way, we all do have our own religion. Do I have my own religion? Yeah. Is it like anybody else's on the planet? No. Like anybody in existence? Probably not. Because I have particularities and eccentricities. And that's why we start to differentiate and say spirituality instead of religion. But what is spirituality? It's your own belief and structure. It's your own interaction. It's your own non-ordinary expectation codified, right, into a system. So I'm not really of the opinion that religion and spirituality are opposed. I don't think religion is bad.
No.
I encourage people to choose a religion that, if that's the route they want to go, choose a religion that feels good to them, that feels familiar and comfortable, and then build your own personal relationship to it. And if you want to continue to call yourself Catholic or Islamic or Mormon, fine. That's totally fine. That's how community is formed. That's how we make friends. That's how we take care of our family. But just recognize that your relationship to that is going to be unique. And if you can really embrace that, the depth of your spirituality as a member of that religion will be exponentially better.
Mhm.
And it's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, that is a beautiful thing. And just to go back on what you said there, like, I suppose the way I would say it is, basically there's the source, and then there's your perception and understanding
Yeah.
of the source. So, for
Yeah.
example, Islam or the Quran, I might have access to the actual source, but then my understanding of what I'm reading or interpreting will be different to somebody else. So, in
Yeah.
that sense, I get what you mean there, and but with Islam specifically, it's not a a religion where it's for this world, it's for this world and the next world. So there is a
Right.
very strong spiritual component to Islam and to the religion of Islam, like which goes back to what I was saying to you earlier, like for me the purpose is the purification of the soul. Well, the soul is more of a spiritual element. Yes, there are rules and regulations of how to live a good life in this world, but it's
Right.
directly connected. So what you do in this life is directly connected to what's going to happen to you in the next life. So this is where the
Right.
idea of purification of the soul comes in. So my whole purpose here is to become the the best version of myself. So basically it's to, I suppose at the top level, it's the whole purpose of life is to worship God. Well, how do you worship God? Well, you worship God
Yeah.
by getting to know God, so being a caretaker of God on the planet. So basically cultivating the earth, cultivating the planet.
Right.
And then the third is being conscious of God at all times. And then the next element or level underneath that is, well, how do you get to know God? Well, as the saying goes, to know God is to know yourself, to know this world as it is, and to know the next world as it is. So knowing yourself is obviously self-study, self-mastery, self-improvement, basically understanding all the gifts you've been given by God and trying to make the most use of them, so you get better and you build character and self-esteem, and then you use that to then make the world a better place. You study the cosmos, you study religion, you study everything basically. So the whole point is basically better yourself, better the world, and being conscious of God at all times, so that when you go into the next life, your soul is in a purified state. So there's a very strong spiritual element to religion. However, you'll have Muslims that are not that spiritual. They might be religious, but they're not that spiritual. So they might do the practices, but they're not really connected. And I'm saying this as somebody who's experienced that. So there was a time where I did the forms, but I'm not really spiritually connected. And you've got to work hard at it. And that comes down to obviously the culture that we live in and the society that we live in today. Obviously, there's so many distractions, there's so many things going on now, and there's almost a clash of values and systems, because at the end of the day, I am a Muslim, but I've been born and raised in the UK, in a Western country. So my programming, there's almost a conflict there, because Islam doesn't always corroborate with the principles of modern Western civilization, and vice versa. So again, that's going to come down to individual interpretation and individual perception. Like, I wouldn't say I'm an expert in Islam, but if I'm speaking to a non-Muslim, they think I'm an expert in Islam. However, because I know how much knowledge and wisdom and stuff there is in Islam, I know that my level of understanding is nowhere near sufficient. But to go back then on what the question I asked you, then you've explained that nicely, but what is your core belief, and do you believe in a God, and do you believe that the purpose of magic is to elevate your soul, or do you have a different purpose and a different mission with what you're doing?
Right. No, I think that's beautiful. I guess I would frame first by saying I feel that a good religion is one that embraces and supports what you've talked about. And I think a bad religion would be one that is based more in dogma, obedience, and kind of like blind following.
Yes.
And so there are a lot of good religions and there are a lot of bad religions. I do believe in a God. I also believe that God is synonymous with some sort of kind of like omnipotent energy. I also believe that that energy can come as non-sentient, that it's more of a fundamental framework of the universe. So my core belief is not reliant on kind of personified specifics like most religions. I'm willing to accept that there is something happening that is much bigger than anything that we're dealing with, that we ultimately probably don't understand, has omnipotence, omnipotence, omniconscience, right? Some sort of oversight over the everything.
Yeah.
And the thing that I would differentiate is that I do not feel that magic has a purpose of, rectifying the soul. Magic is a tool. Again, magic is active interaction with the non-ordinary. Spirituality, like the path of being spiritual, the path of growing, is 100% about clarifying the soul for the next level, for the next layer. And maybe that includes reincarnation back around because the biological lifespan of the human wasn't enough for you to get the lesson. You got to go try again. I'm fine with that. I'm not attached either way. So kind of just to move the words around a bit, spirituality is the one that is about making yourself the absolute best you can, from your education and understandings all the way up to your practices and your relationships. Magic is one of the tools that you can use to get there. But magic can also be used to improve your health. It can also be used to win the lottery. It can also be used to whatever, it's the toolkit, so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And what I get from these conversations, what I suppose I'm trying to emphasize is magic isn't the hocus pocus, radida, crazy nut stuff. It is an actual science for some people. I know you've touched upon it earlier that they're cousins, but some people do treat it as a science, and certain aspects of it, there are overlaps between science and magic. Obviously, when you start going to the non-ordinary phenomenon, it's a bit more difficult. But then,
well, I guess
yeah,
I was going to add the one way that I differentiate, because that word science has become loaded. Everybody says trust the science, and you're like, which fucking science?
Yeah.
Excuse my language. Science and magic both use a process of structured investigation.
Yes.
Right. They share a process of test, observe, explore, repeat. The difference is what they do with the results. So in that sense, yes, science or magic can be a science to some people, but what that's really saying is some people treat magic in a very analytical, process-oriented way.
Yeah,
maybe that clarifies for some people that what I'm saying.
It goes back to this idea that obviously there's this almost war between science versus religion, but I don't see it that way, and Islam doesn't say it that way either. Religion and science are not opposed to one another. Like, science is the language for us to understand God's creative power and God's creative process. So they go hand in hand. And when Islam was at its when Islam was at its zenith, it was number one around the world because of the emphasis placed upon science and study and education. And one of the core concepts of the Quran is we created this for you to think. This is a book for people who think, and the whole point of thinking is to test, to think, to analyze, to reflect, to gain knowledge. And part of that is science. So this idea of science being opposed to religion, not for me, and not in Islam, which I suppose goes
that would differentiate a good religion from bad religion, right? Good, bad religion is going to narrow you into a tunnel of dogma where you're not utilizing the tools available to you. A good religion is going to say, take a look at magic, be careful with these ones, take a look at science, don't take it too seriously, do all 100%. The things.
And that's going to come down to your upbringing as well, because obviously if you're in we could be of the same religion, but if one person comes from a family where you're encouraged to investigate, you're encouraged to explore, and whereas another upbringing, is the opposite, where this is right, that's it, don't question it, don't go outside of it, just do it. So it's not the religion itself in a lot of these cases, it's the understanding of the religion and how people are brought up into that religion. And obviously these days it's a lot different because I suppose there's a collective problem right now where we're all kind of suffering with focus and productivity and having the time to really study not just the form but the spiritual practices and actually connecting on a spiritual level with the religion. And I mean, to connect back with what I was getting at earlier, the idea of science and magic being different, but these days, you have a lot of talk about the quantum field, and that's becoming more and more acceptable even in science. And what are your thoughts on the quantum field? Like, do you have any thoughts of it? Is that more on the magic side, or is it more ordinary science side now? Obviously, with the way things are going now, it's becoming more acceptable. There's more kind of
Right.
tests being done on it. Like, what's your view on it?
I mean, it goes back to that picture frame analogy, which is a great run through or a through thread for this whole thing. If magic is dealing with the non-ordinary and the ordinary, right? Everything in and out of the frame, and science is dealing with what's inside the frame, science can expand the frame, right? It's not a static frame. It's constantly growing in size. I like to say if you personify these into people, you've got intuition, instinct, empathy, you've got the mystic, you've got all these archetypes in the room, and you've got the scientist. And the scientist is over in the corner at his workbench saying, oh my God, here's all the proof to validate this thing. And you're like, yeah, we know. We've been there. We've been doing that. Like, welcome. I'm glad you found it. Awesome. And so when I look at things like quantum field, entanglement, strange force, what they're doing with the particle colliders, which honestly makes me a little bit nervous. All of that is science reaching farther and farther and farther to push the frame of its understanding, to drag its empirical bias out into the rest of the universe. Science is the last guy in the room to get the message. And so 100% it's magic, or it was magic, and now it is magic and science. And so kind of in an ironic, as you might notice, there's a lot of paradoxes in magic. There are some things that are both, right? And it's again dependent on context. In the context of doing it empirically, quantum fields can be done in a scientific way now because science has reached that far into the cosmos. In terms of doing it non-empirically, magic has been doing quantum field entanglement for eons, right? We've been building morphic fields and spaces and results through spells and rituals and occult for a long time. I would say that these are the same thing. Quantum field work is just the scientific way of explaining what's always been happening. And so to that effect, I think it's really important to say the things inside of the frame aren't science. The things inside of the frame just are. Science is simply describing and explaining them in its own language.
Brilliant. Love that. Brilliant. I mean, I've got so many more notes that I made from some of your content. We haven't had time to go through it. But you touched upon some of those things there. So talk to us a little bit about the difference between instinct versus intuition and why it's important to know the difference.
Yeah, this is one of the most important pieces that I give people, because whether you're just trying to be a better person or whether you are trying to perform, high magic or deep magic, you really do want to understand and, for lack of a better word, map out how your unique systems work. The human entity, I don't even want to say body because it's a lot of bodies stacked on top of each other, but the human entity has a lot of things happening, a lot of tool sets. And particularly in Western culture, we've essentially been taught to bias heavily towards intellect and cognition, and to, even outside of religions, kind of ignore huge sections of other phenomenon, other tool sets that are happening. So instinct, intuition, empathy all gets kind of looped into this single thing that we do. It's actually multiple systems stacked on top of each other. And I think I've gone over this online, but if not, we'll call it a sneak peek into kind of like the deeper frameworks. What I've noticed in my research with myself and with clients, instinct almost, I would say as a rule, I'm hesitant to make rules about anything in non-ordinary. Instinct happens in the first 1 to 2 seconds, almost as a rule. It is a non-cognitive, non-intellectual phenomenon. It is typically, for most people, felt in the lower abdomen or lower chakra, if you want to use that system. It is almost always in positive or negative, affirmation or denial, yes or no, want or don't want. It's a very like primal sensation. It requires almost no conscious input.
Mm-hmm.
It is pure data in a yes or no sense. Intuition comes on later. You know, it happens. It doesn't happen that fast. As and as expansive as intuition is, it is a little slower even than instinct, and usually will set in for most people in 5 to 10 seconds at the earliest, maybe as quick as 3 seconds, and then can extend out towards 60 seconds. If you train yourself, you can kind of drag that intuitive space out. It's kind of a liminal space. And I say liminal because intuition is definitely touching on non-intellectual space like instinct, but it is also using the subconscious and the conscious mind and the intellectual process to frame and present that to you. Mm-hmm. And so it's kind of the bridge. And then at some point, depending on how heady you are or how brain dead you are, which in some cases is a good thing, cognition and intellect will kick in and kind of run intuition over, right? And so it's only been the last couple of years that I've been able to really nail it down to this framework. And everybody that I use this description with is able to isolate out the different sensation sets. You're still going to feel intuition and instinct both in the gut or the solar plex. Typically, some people feel intuition up above the head in kind of the higher chakra space. But one of the things that gets conflated a lot is that the sensation, right, the antenna, is being defined by a lot of people as the thing doing it, right? So I felt it in my gut, so it's my guts. And so intuition and instinct are all gut things. Yes, that's where the antenna is, but the systems are completely different. They're mechanistically different layers. I find that instinct is much more part of our primal biology, and intuition is much more connected to our esoteric, energetic body.
Brilliant.
I could go for hours, but
yeah, I was about to say, you know, that's opened up a whole new kind of worms. I suppose, you know, before we finish off, then just on this little topic, then is why would, you know, somebody watching this, why would you want to? Why is it important to differentiate this and know for yourself? And then secondly, how do you improve upon these? Like, what do you need to do to improve upon some that you can rely on your instinct and rely on intuition rather than be plagued by self-doubt and then being at the mercy of your intellect to either convince you or convince you not?
Right. Well, I would say there's other systems at play. There's emotion, right? And so that brings you empathy, but it also brings you emotional turmoil. You're reacting to your negative emotions. There's also the egoic structure. Egoic structure primarily connects, to us through our intellect. And so once the head starts moving, there's all manner of back doors for ego to come in there. Instinct, true instinct. And I would actually, my hot take for the day is most people actually have no idea what their instinct feels like, because there is not a negative version of instinct. This is why I hit on it so hard. It is a fundamental sense of good, bad, right, wrong, yes or no, based on you, your biology, your needs, your wants. But it's even deeper than needs and wants. It's like the needs and wants of your cellular DNA. It's a very core function. And to that effect, ego doesn't really play down there, right? Ego's
it's kind of like a reflex reaction kind of thing. You've got no control over it. It just happens.
Yeah, it's a reflexatory sense-making mechanism. And so for that reason alone, getting to know that one system in our body that can't be taken over by ego is a phenomenal tool set, because ego is where, you know, your fears, your doubts, your expectations, your personal image, your image of the people around you, like all of that lives. So for one, that system is a great tool set to kind of get around that. And then two, intuition, you know, I don't know if you kind of track some of the biohacker guys, but there was a book called Stealing Fire by Jamie Wheel and Stephen.
I've got that, but I haven't read that book yet. It's there on my shelf. I don't know if you can see on the background.
Yeah.
I read his recent one, the Recapture
the Rapture.
Yeah. I read that one. That
Yeah,
was mind blowing.
They're both, it's, I mean, the way that he's exploring what I would call mysticism, though it's maybe less esoterically inclined. Long story short, Stealing Fire is kind of an overview of like, I totally lost my train of thought.
Instinct, intuition, what's got to do with Stealing Fire?
Yeah, I know, it just like totally left. Maybe I'm not supposed to say it out loud.
Fine.
But I mean, the general concept being like intuition. Oh, that's where I was going. So intuition is connected to subconscious. In Stealing Fire, they did some studies and they said, okay, how fast is subconscious, right? Because it seems like a lot of data gets crunched really fast. And they did a bunch of tests and they basically found, and I might be misremembering the numbers, but conscious problem solving, conscious active thought processing of information is like, I think 2 to 3 bytes per second. I believe it was bytes. It might have been kilobytes, but in computer terms, it's very, very slow. And they said, okay, based on what we just done to get that number, this is not an empirical study. It's a relative analysis. How fast is subconscious? And so they tried to apply all the same measurement systems and they literally couldn't get a number. It was too fast. True subconscious data processing is just exponentially faster than cognition, right? Intuition is the non-ordinary phenomenon that taps into subconscious data processing, right? It's that liminal bridge between raw magic energy and kind of like deeper, unfettered cognition. To that effect, your intuition is going to be one of the most powerful sense-making kind of chunkers of data that you have access to. That alone is worth tapping into and differentiating it from instinct, because instinct will give you a strong yes or no in half a second. Intuition is going to give you a very complex answer to a much more complicated thing in a minute or two. However, because it's connected to cognition, it's now sensitive to ego. And so you really do want to have access to both systems separately.
Based on what you just said there, like, a lot of this then is down to how healthy your subconscious mind is. Because, if you've got an unhealthy subconscious mind, then the intuition, will that not be tainted and cause you to maybe do things that are really not beneficial? Like, so I suppose what I'm trying to get at there, how important, obviously we're living in a world now where our subconscious mind is attacked since the day we're born. And especially now with the mind, the scrolling, with all the videos, all the movies, the music. So I suppose most people don't really realize how clogged up their subconscious mind is. A lot of people might not even think about it or even care to think about it. But how much damage are we doing to ourselves with this subconscious kind of problem? Even take, for example, movies. So obviously growing up, we've seen a lot of movies where there's a lot of violence, there's a lot of death, there's a lot of gory stuff. Like, although we're on a conscious level, we're thinking, well, this is a movie, it's not real. There's they say that the subconscious mind can't tell the difference between reality and falsehood. So although our conscious mind might be saying, well, this isn't real, is our subconscious mind picking all this up? And is this a cause for trauma? So, we might experience a death. And, although we've never actually experienced a real death, because we've experienced one in the movies, and now there's a lot of emotional attachment and you really get involved. Are these things causing problems to our subconscious mind? And if so, how can we basically rectify it?
Yeah, I mean, a phrase that I've used quite a bit lately, I don't know if it's been said before, but mental hygiene is extremely important. There's the chance to not only have inherited clutter, but to receive clutter and damage from trauma. And now, like you've pointed out really well, the cultural clutter and just muck that is being handed to us. If your subconscious is not trained, which requires you to train, you're gonna collect that stuff without realizing it. I will say that while intuition is kind of the bridge between this kind of like natural gut response and the kind of higher order cognition, it also gets a lot of input from perceptivity, which is kind of your connection to higher self, your connection to God or spirit. Intuition is kind of the it's the non-active aggregator of all of these different systems. And that's why it's so important, because it's the hub. A lot of people conflate and mix perceptivity into intuition, and that's fine, right? Because that's a positive influence. But like you said, there's a lot of negative influences. Whatever's down in the basement of your mind. There's I use a system a lot with clients to do assessments called Integral Theory by Ken Wilber. And love it or hate it, it's a meta map that is aggregating dozens and dozens and dozens of systems of analysis and developmental theory and culture. If you take it, with a grain of salt that anything human made has flaws, it's a pretty system. And he talks about a concept of throughout your life, you have the responsibility to wake up, which is your spirituality, to grow up, which is your development, to clean up, which is your trauma processing and subconscious mental hygiene, and to show up, which is once you've done all of that, you are now hopefully qualified to give back to the people around you. The reason why we see so many scandals in spiritual groups, and we won't pick at particular names, but it's because somebody has put a lot of emphasis, or even a whole group, right, a whole sect of a religion, a lot of emphasis in waking up, but no emphasis in growing up. So there's no developed, mature ethical framework, and then power corrupts. Or they've done a lot of work in growing up, but not in waking up. And so cool, you make $1 bajillion a month, and you're an empty shell of a human. Awesome. But either way, you've got to go through cleaning up, because okay, maybe you woke up and show up, and now, you wake up, grow up, and now you're trying to show up. Well, if you didn't clean up, all of that trauma is going to come back around. All of that sloppy subconscious muck is going to come back around and taint your intuition system. It's going to taint your actions. Your ego is going to get twisted.
Yeah, love it all. Absolutely love that. So, your advice then for practical steps, what can you do practically for somebody listening right now? What can you practically do to basically clear this subconscious clutter and increase your, instinct and intuition? Is there a step-by-step guide, or what's your advice?
I mean, if you kind of dig through the Twitter content, I have been getting pushed to formulate it into a book, so I should probably do that at some point. Bottom line, the first step is always awareness, and I use that with a capital A. The system of awareness, of observation, of presence, of attunement to what's going on around you, even before your sense-making systems, intuition, instinct, cognition, etc., chime in. There is a process of the information is actually entering your system. Most people's awareness is so shut down that they are literally operating off of expectations, biases, and traumas, right?
Yeah.
And so that's where you get kind of the disrespectful term of NPC. You've got a lot of non-player characters that are not participating.
Yeah.
That movie that just came out, what's it called, with Ryan Reynolds, the guy, or I can't remember
which one. I don't know.
It's recent, where he's a video game NPC and then he wakes up.
Right. Okay.
So that's actually like an esoteric primer on personal foundations, because the first thing that he had to do to get a clue was to be paying attention, right? And to look above him and go, oh my God, there's a hologram above me that has like are you ready to enter the maze? And if I click what? This is so weird. Back to kind of reality, like if you're not paying attention, how do you expect to do anything? And so I always start people like, build your awareness, like literally sit on the park corner and pay attention. Something we haven't talked about is that I have somewhere over 11,000 hours in wilderness immersive training, survival, search and rescue, and medical. And one of the biggest parts of the training is literally waking up every morning at sunrise and sitting against a tree for an hour without moving and just paying attention. What does it feel like? What does it smell like? What does it sound like? What is happening? Do that at the coffee shop. Do that in your house. Do that in a quiet room and watch your own thoughts. When you get emotional or pissed off, have a sit for 5 minutes and just look. You don't have to do anything. What I find is that instinct is built in. You don't have to learn how to instinct. And the intuition system is active. It's just going to be grabbing from whatever clutter you haven't cleaned up yet. Start with awareness. Most people have the expertise built into their system grow and to become better and to do something with that if they know it's there. So first step, be aware.
Mm-hmm.
And that includes awareness of body, awareness of mind, awareness of energetics, awareness of other people, emotions, everything.
Yeah.
You do that and you're gonna get 100 steps ahead of everybody around you really fast.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Brilliant. I mean, absolutely, all of that. So once you get past the awareness stage, then is there something else that you need to do? Then I know I read some of your threads, and obviously meditation comes up a lot. Is there a specific type of meditation, or any type, or what's
Right.
the next step after the awareness stage?
I mean, I double click on meditation a lot because I do a lot with inner work and self mastery, and so it's an easy tool set. I'm not attached to that being the only way.
Yeah.
Vipassana body scans or any form of body scan is really helpful to build physical awareness. You can remodel some of these into environmental awareness. So instead of scanning the body, you're looking around you, and maybe it's something as simple as counting treetops.
Mm-hmm.
And then you go left to right, right to left, back and forth. Maybe it's something as little as counting squirrels. It doesn't really matter, but some sort of scan, whether it's body or environment,
Mm-hmm.
super helpful. Zen meditation is great for building discipline, internal cognitive and energetic discipline. I didn't dabble as much because I had kind of already found the tool sets elsewhere, but there are a lot of really good meditations in Tibetan lore, and kind of like Eastern philosophy, tantric meditation, not the sex cult kind, but the actual core of tantra. Super useful. The main thing again that I try and get across to people is that you don't have to go straight to 1 hour of meditating. You don't have to go straight to master level anything.
Yes.
We learn in increments. We build habits on small steps. So chomp it down into the smallest, simplest step you can. If all you have is 3 minutes sitting in your car waiting for your kids to come out of school and get in so you can go home, use that to do something.
Yeah.
Small bites simultaneously starts to build the skill, just like building a muscle, but it also gives you evidence.
Mm-hmm.
It gives you internal evidence in your confidence to do the thing. And so you do a small thing every day, you're way farther down the road than you ever could have imagined before you realize it.
Brilliant. Absolutely that. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure talking. I mean, I could go on for hours, as I do with most of these.
Sure, yeah, me too.
But I think we should wrap it up there, and I'm more than happy to bring you on again another time. So just before we finish, then who is your ideal client? What do you do, and how can people connect with you or find out more?
Right. Well, like I said, there's kind of two sides. Rich Wallace Jewelry is its own thing. My personal work as a coach and a consultant is its own like two-faced thing. Mm-hmm. One face is, we do project consulting for projects that matter, and that need a little bit more professional skills, mastery, and structure to succeed. So if you're launching a crypto project, if you're launching a small business, if you already own a small business, might be able to help. Conversation is free, and then we'll go from there. Same thing with coaching. When I'm working with people on esoterics and spirituality, my clients are kind of drawn to me because they are looking for a meta map. They're looking for a practical sense of all of the pieces. They're not looking for dogma. They're not looking for shortcuts. They're not looking for in-group dynamics. They're looking for the answers to solve whatever their current challenge is.
Yeah.
So if you are in a position where energetically, spiritually, mystically, esoterically, you feel stuck, you feel a little confused, or you feel like you're working too hard, you probably are, and I can probably help you. And then Ritualis is the same thing. There's nothing wrong with outsourcing some of the responsibility for a mission to an object. I tell every single client, this is not going to fix everything. I don't want you to become reliant on it. My greatest hope is that whatever I put into this object, you take it onto yourself and you give it to the next person or sell it to the next person, whatever feels good to you. And so a good client for Ritualis is somebody who trusts that object energetics is possible, desires a leg up, kind of a boost, and is attracted to the style and aesthetic and method that I use. And then if that's the case, I can help you. And if you're not sure which one, or if you want to do a custom, you can always, contact me.
Brilliant. And then just to finish that off, how can they contact you? Where should they go to contact you?
Yeah, good question. There's a lot of different pieces. I haven't really unified them into one website lately because I kind of did this siloing thing a bit to not confuse people. If you go to ritualis.info/links, you will get a list of all of the links. That link is on my Twitter account, Metaphyst Wolf, METAPHYST. Twitter is basically the hub at this point. So all the links, all of the relative content, what's the newest thing that I'm focusing on, what's where my mastery is, all of that's on Twitter. So that's probably the safest bet.
Excellent. And as always, I will drop the links to those in the comments below if you're watching on YouTube and on the podcast as well. And that's it there. So once again, Kedrik, thank you for being. It's been a real pleasure. Really enjoyed it. And any last words before we sign off?
No, it's been a pleasure. I'm always excited to talk to people who are pulling in more of a meta perspective. I love the way that you navigate concepts, so it makes it a lot easier to connect on these, and I think it allows us to serve our audiences better when we do that. So it's been a real pleasure. Hopefully next time I'll be in a place where I can have my camera set up and we can have a little more life in the situation.
So I suppose I just should clarify, because I get a lot of these questions, like when I get these esoteric spiritualists on and they're like, why don't they show their face? What are they trying to hide? In this instance, there's nothing being hidden. It's just that you're in a place where the internet connection isn't great. So hopefully next time, you can show your face.
Yeah, I'll prioritize that next time so we can kind of kill some of the skepticism. I'm definitely very doxxed. So if you go to ritualis.info, there's a video of me talking to the camera, like nothing to hide here.
Brilliant. Well, that's brilliant. And as for the audience, hope you enjoyed the episode. If you did, let me know in the comments below. If you've got any questions or queries, let me know. Otherwise, I will see you in the next episode. Take care now. Bye-bye.